So we've had a lot of questions come in on this topic. So we've just picked one that sort of sums up the tone of a lot of them. If the Israel invasion continues to escalate, how many seats could Labour be at risk of losing as a result of Keir Starmer's disastrous messaging? This is the questioner's words last week. So people are sort of very shocked, basically, about the comments that he made in an LBC interview. It was on the 11th of November during Labour conference when he appeared to say that Israel has the right to cut water and power off from Gaza.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously, everything should be done within international law, but I don't want to step away from the sort of core principles that Israel has a right to defend herself and Hamas bears responsibility.
And then it took him 9 days to say that wasn't really what he meant to say. He was sort of answering the question before, but it's too late. The clip's gone viral and a lot of people are very offended and upset by it. And it's caused a lot of damage in the party so far. I think around 20 Labour councillors have resigned, and that means that Labour has lost its majority on Oxford Council. And over 150 Muslim Labour councillors are petitioning the leadership to support an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. And then there was a visit that he made to the South Wales Islamic Centre, which is one of Wales's oldest mosques. And he, they put out a statement afterwards saying that he'd gravely misrepresented the nature of the visit in his tweets afterwards, which showed him sort of warmly greeting people and saying that they'd discussed humanitarian aid and a two-state solution and things. And they'd said the purpose had been to raise the plight of Palestinians and kind of robustly question him on the things that he'd said. So it seems to be that the tensions in the party over this are escalating. Rachel, you've been following this closely this week. I mean, how much potential does this have to sort of escalate even further?
It's quite hard to say. I think at this point, at the moment, resignations and serious rebellions are contained to local government rather than in Westminster. If it spreads further to Westminster, I think that it'll be a very obvious problem for him.
Yeah.
But I think there's a separate problem, which is just a complete breakdown in discipline.
Yeah.
You've seen a couple of shadow ministers go completely off message in the House of Commons. 3 in total, I think it is.
Yeah, let's talk about those. So this is a mix of people from different factions in the party as well. So Jess Phillips, usually loyal, seen as on the right of the party, shadow domestic violence minister. I mean, she said for Rishi Sunak to condemn Israel if it breaches international law. And she was saying this means a great deal to her constituents. She has a Birmingham constituency. Flo Eshalomi, Shadow Democracy Minister, she was calling for a temporary ceasefire. And then you had Yasmin Qureshi as well, Shadow Equalities Minister. So these are all frontbenchers calling on the Prime Minister to back a ceasefire in Gaza. And this is not Labour's line. So all of them have sort of strayed from the party line.
Yeah. So there are a number of groups that I think Keir Starmer has to manage effectively to sort of get through the weeks and months ahead. I think the next flashpoint may be when there's a ground invasion in Gaza, when the war will get more bloody and, questions about where it goes next and what Labour's position should be will intensify. He has to manage, I think, some of his Muslim MPs, which he's met with this week to try and allay their concerns. I think they're probably satisfied for now and think that the position which has moved from being Israel has a right to defend itself to we'd like to see humanitarian pauses in hostilities to ensure enough aid gets in there into Gaza. I think that group's probably satisfied for now, but would like to see language change to ceasefire. Maybe the way it's been reported by some places so far is that this is just a left-right issue. I think there's concern amongst all wings of the party, bearing in mind the problems that they had with anti-Semitism under Jeremy Corbyn. He also has to manage Jewish Labour MPs and members that move in to call for a ceasefire. Will be very difficult for Keir Starmer to take that position. But I think it's probably worth pointing out more broadly that the Labour Party's position on the conflict is doesn't really have impact on the conflict itself. Hamas fighters and the Israeli Defence Force are not going to lay down their guns because a human rights lawyer called Keir Starmer wants them to. The people who really matter in this in terms of the international conversation obviously is the UK government but more importantly the US and the EU, which will meet this week. And I think they're all going to be basically on the same page in that, Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, has said that they favour pauses in hostility for aid. The EU is meeting on Thursday, which is when we're recording this podcast, when they're likely to take a similar position. And I think probably people who are around Keir Starmer don't think it's helpful to have a position that departs from that and from the UK government.
Yes, because at the moment there's no difference between Labour's position on this and the UK government's position. It just so happens that the internal politics of the Labour Party and its electorate makes it more awkward for it to try and find a balanced line between the groups that it, like you very well laid out, that it's trying to sympathise with and hear. And it looks like they've clumsily been going about this at the moment.
Yes, I think the thing that's caused the most damage is that 9-day wait in correcting that initial interview, in which, on the face of it, in the black and white words, it looked like Keir Starmer was somehow condoning war crimes,
besiege,
and the withholding of power and water. I think it was that he was asked about specifically. People close to him said he was quite tired, but. In the intervening period, there's been an entire Labour Party conference. There's been two by-elections, and throughout that time,
he's been in front of reporters a lot.
Yeah, there's been plenty of opportunities to say we need to go on record and correct this and recognise some of the hurt caused, and that hasn't happened. And I think what has been a comms failure has been allowed to fester and become a real political problem for him.
Yeah. And how about the electoral problem? Because that's what our question is actually about. How many seats could Labour be at risk of losing? It's interesting, isn't it? Sundar Kutwala, who is the head of British Future, a think tank, very, very respected writer about immigration in the UK and these kind of topics. He's crunched the numbers and he's warning against over-reading into this. He said that, even after the Iraq invasion, the impact on Labour's sort of electoral standing was marginal, but it did have a long-term impact in terms of certain groups feeling alienated from the party. And, Tower Hamlets, for example, it still has a sort of successor group running the council to the George Galloway Stop the War kind of times. Tower Hamlets first, I think now Aspire. And so there are various seats where you do have a big population of Muslim voters, and it's not just Muslim voters who are exercised by this issue, but, you have seen the Labour Muslim Councillors Network putting out this petition, and, Muslim voters generally do overwhelmingly vote for Labour, even though they obviously don't vote in one block, but you've seen the numbers, there are a lot of seats which Labour represents, which has this kind of balance of population. I remember going to the Batley and Spen by-election, and it really was a struggle for Labour, who I think there was a feeling that they'd taken some of those voters for granted for quite a long time, assuming that they would just turn out for them, where they were really fighting hard for each vote, to the extent that they were saying quite, slightly distasteful things in terms of, our candidate wouldn't be lobby fodder for a government that, is on Narendra Modi's side and things, bringing that kind of politics into it. They obviously won that by-election, but to me, it was a sign there's a slight unease there. George Galloway was trying to cause trouble there as well. And, could that happen in certain constituencies, but also on certain councils if this is allowed to sort of develop without getting a lid on the situation? So.
I'm afraid I don't know about councils, but I think I've seen some estimates where it said that the Muslim population is greater than the Labour majority, and that's in around 30 constituencies. But as you sort of alluded to there, that's a really crude way of looking at it. Yeah. That's like saying, all voters of one ethnic group would vote in a particular way, and that's really not a very helpful way of looking at it. So I don't think there's any reliable data on how it would necessarily affect voters. But as I was trying to sort of get to earlier, it's not just an ethnic minority issue for him. It's an issue that Liberal voters are very passionate about. It's not necessarily going to break down in one particular way. Similarly, I don't think the conflict's going to necessarily be viewed in the same way as it is now, because it depends how it plays out, and it's it's very, very difficult to predict that at the moment.
I think it's an issue that really kind of haunts the Labour Party and has done for some time, because obviously I think, as we were saying earlier, part of Starmer's comments on LBC, the comments that upset quite a lot of people. I mean, in a way that very much felt like too much of an overcorrection from the Corbyn approach to the conflict and the stance that was taken there. And obviously that was something that Corbyn was criticised quite heavily for at the time. Obviously there's been issues with anti-Semitism within the Labour Party as well, so you can understand why there might be caution around this issue. But it was unfortunate that that was the wording he used, because it felt like he was sanctioning, war crimes or a ground invasion. And also, considering Starmer's reputation as a human rights lawyer, it was it wasn't really a sensible position to take in terms of the law as well. But yeah, this is an issue that haunts the Labour Party, and I think that's why they've been so conscious around it. It's interesting, they managed to, I think a lot of people were concerned that it might overshadow Labour conference, but actually they managed at the time to handle it quite well. And it didn't. Despite everything that was going on, it didn't seem to, permeate too much of what was happening at conference. But since then, it's become a much bigger issue, and it's really become almost one of the most defining problems for Starmer's, leadership so far. So you can understand why they're very, very nervous around it. But absolutely, I think it isn't just an issue, as Rachel was saying, within kind of Muslim and Jewish communities. I think a lot of people are concerned by the approach being taken by leaders across the West. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's only going to develop, isn't it? Because there is going to be an intensification of the response from Israel that, will mean that we see more and more atrocious images and stories coming out of Gaza, which will have an impact on public opinion. I think there's some evidence that it already has. And of course, the international consensus changes as these developments take place. And I think Labour's been caught on the back foot again, exactly because, as you say, there's that overcorrection and nervousness. But it means that, Keir Starmer could potentially have his reputation affected in the way that Jeremy Corbyn did for the sort of opposite reasons, his commitment to the Palestinian cause and the anti-Semitism that bubbled up in the party, like under that guise sometimes.
It's worth pointing out that a lot of the people who in Labour who have been quite critical have actually publicly directed most of their criticism at the government. So I think he has managed to maintain party discipline quite well. But I think one of the things that probably worth reflecting is that there are some people within the Jewish community and within the Jewish Labour movement who would have wanted to have seen stronger criticism of some elements of, for example, the BBC coverage, which failed to mention the fact that Hamas is a terror group. I think they would have probably liked him to be stronger on that. He's kind of caught in between. There's a lot to risk here, and it's a very tricky thing for him to manage.
Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.